Welcome back to the channel. You are listening to Sheroy's rather deflated voice today. This is the One Mic podcast after a 2-0 loss to Bournemouth away from home. And I can only describe that as a shock result, but perhaps more concerningly, a shock performance. I didn't see that one coming. I assume that you were all the same, right? Looking at this fixture going into it, we played before Manchester City, we played before Liverpool, and we have an opportunity to take top spot and apply pressure to our rivals. Manchester City going away to Wolves. Wolves are a team that have taken points off them before, and we all know that this season Chelsea are not an easy team to overcome. But we didn't do our job. We didn't do our job, and I toyed with the idea of recording this podcast late last night, but I took the view that I was still too emotional. And that was just a bit too raw. And I thought that if I slept on it, maybe I'd have time to reflect and it wouldn't seem as bad as it did on Saturday. But I was wrong. I was wrong. I didn't watch any of the Sunday football. I call me unprofessional because I know that I'm a football podcaster. But I couldn't bring myself to watch City because I knew they'd win. And I couldn't take any joy in watching Liverpool-Chelsea either because we didn't do our job. This was the first time in a while that I've watched Arsenal and I wanted the full-time whistle to go. I wanted it to stop. And a lot of what I'm saying now and what I'm about to say here, it is criticism. It is, plain and simple. But it's not criticism suggesting that all of the positive stuff that we've been discussing about this club, this manager, these players before is an absolute falsity or was a house of cards. That's not what I'm saying at all. The criticism and the pain is because I know how close we are. I know how close we are. And it just hurts so much that we appear to be our own worst enemy in certain scenarios. Let's get into it. Forget the rest of this introduction. I had a bit more planned, but I'm going to leave it. I just need to talk about this game because I reckon you guys are the same. After a result like that, we just need some therapy. And that's what I selfishly use this podcast for. The starting 11 came out. Before I saw that starting 11, I thought that Bukayo Saka was going to be fit. Listening to Mikel Arteta's pre-match press conference, I thought he was going to be okay. So I thought that it was going to be maybe a 2, maybe a 3. And I didn't think we'd concede because we're very good defensively away from home. And our goalkeeper's been immaculate and our back four have been immaculate. I don't think it was naive of me to think that, was it? But I saw that team and I saw the lineup and it took me a while to try and figure out what it was going to look like. And I remember on the AFTV watch along, a lot of comments in the chat were saying, I mean, I didn't watch it, but a lot of the comments in the chat were saying, guys, Marino's in the 10. He played there for Spain. He's really good there. And I thought, okay. I don't know much about him in that position. I didn't think that that was the position that he was brought in for. And having seen his performance there, I still don't think that's the position that he was brought in for. But I altered my prediction immediately my exact words were nervy 1-0. And I said that because you looked at that and you knew that there wasn't going to be enough creativity. We weren't going to create enough gilt-edged chances for this to be a 3, 4, or 5, right? Having said all of that, there was a lot of criticism after the match about Arteta's selection. I looked at that and I still predicted a win. And I say that because, yeah, I knew it wasn't going to be free-flowing. I knew we weren't going to be creating loads of chances. But looking at that lineup, is it inconceivable that Raheem Sterling or Leandro Trossard could cut one back to Kai Havertz in the box and we could get a goal? Is it inconceivable that even though we don't have Saka, who's a great set-piece deliveryman, we could get a corner and score a goal? Is it inconceivable that with someone like Raheem Sterling, who we brought in for this exact sort of scenario where the Saka's out, we could perhaps hit Bournemouth on the break? I could see us scoring and I could see us remaining defensively solid. So I didn't look at that lineup and think that's a lineup that has been picked and it's almost a certainty that we're not going to look like scoring for the whole game. And that's why I'm not too critical here. My whole point here is when we look immaculate, I heap praise on the players, right? Because I hold the players accountable and I hold them to the standards that they have proven in certain games they can meet. To that end, I looked at that lineup and I thought, well, if you perform to the extent that you need to perform, and given that we have players like Martinelli, Zinchenko on the bench who can perhaps give us that bit of creativity, Ethan, I thought we had enough. And in all honesty, we should have had enough. But we can't shy away from the fact that this was a game where we didn't have Timber, who has looked like one of our best defenders this year. We still don't have Odegaard. And look, the absence of Odegaard has been felt in a lot of games. I know that people have said that Trossard has been fantastic and that we haven't really thought about Odegaard too much, but that's a bit over the top for me. Odegaard in our team is irreplaceable. And he'd be irreplaceable in a lot of teams because of how good he is, right? Martinelli was a fitness concern, so he didn't start. But the key was Bukayo Saka. Bukayo Saka is one of those players that, even if you're not playing well, he's a moments player that can drag you out of the mud. His defensive work is so incredible. He's an absolute talisman. And a lot of people wanted to know, well, what do Arsenal look like without Odegaard and Saka? Because they don't have replacements for those two players that it's never going to be like for like. No one's ever suggested it's going to be like for like. But those are two areas where we know that we don't really even have a replacement that's close. And I think we got our answer. And I think we got our answer there, right? I need to begin this by saying I know that injuries are part and parcel of the game, and that's why when Rodri went down, for example, if you haven't watched the Gooniverse episode where James and I were discussing that, I said there are so many people rejoicing about this injury. You might end up regretting it because of the way that this season looks like it's progressing, the amount of games that are being played, the amount of players that are going down. There will come a time where Odegaard isn't our only serious absentee. And that happened today. What we need to really be doing is not looking outward, not looking at what could happen with other teams to give us that impetus, what could happen with other teams, where other teams could slip up, where other teams could drop points. We need to continue looking inward and getting our own house in order. And that is something that I really, really do think. I'm not actually talking about the players or the club here. To an extent, I feel like I'm talking to myself and parts of the fan base. We need to get in the habit of looking inward here. And I say that because I've seen a lot of commentary here after the match about the refereeing decision. And to that end, I need to bring this comment up from my AFTV fan camp. A lot of people told me don't read the I love the comments, right? I'm always going to read the comments. So I am that guy. I'm in the comments. It is what it is. And I'm going to be very respectful of this person here because I don't know him, notwithstanding the fact that he didn't show me the same courtesy. Better Hours 5676. Pure, fickle, unloyal, clueless football fan. When we beat Spurs and drew with 10 at City, we were the greatest side ever and manager. Lose a game after another pathetic showing from match officials, including Webb in the stands, and this guy and so-called Arsenal fans want to rip the players and manager apart. Go support Manchester City or Real Madrid. Quite a lot to unpack there. Thank you for the engagement, first and foremost. The difference there, my friend, is that in those games, when we're talking about Manchester City, when we're talking about Brighton, we were 1-0 up. There was no problem with having a totally defensive setup in either game because we were 1-0 up. We had something to protect. And in all honesty, even with 11 men, a point at the Etihad wouldn't have been the end of the world. At that stage of the season, given the rate at which Brighton equalised against us after we went down to 10, a point wasn't the end of the world. But this was a game against Bournemouth, knowing the fixtures that we have to arrive, that was an absolute must-win. And that, I think, is where a lot of the criticism comes from. So if we're looking at the first half before the red card, I can't remember a shot on target. And I don't think there was one. The only shining light for me in that first half was Raheem Sterling. And that's not me saying that Raheem Sterling was setting the world alight by any means. He looked the best of a bad bunch on the day, but in the same way that there are certain games where everything goes through Bukayo Saka, it looked like everything was having to go through Raheem Sterling. There were two or three opportunities where he actually did some very good work, found himself in space, either got in behind or cut in. And I was watching that and I thought, it's only a matter of time before something comes off for him because he looks our primary outlet. And I was sat there thinking, even though I didn't genuinely, there wasn't a moment in that game where I was convinced that we were going to win. It was perhaps hope more than being convinced. But that was a game, speaking about the way in which I thought a goal could come earlier, he made me think, you know what? We may not be completely at it today, but if we're going to nick it, it's going to come through him. And then we have a red card. The third game in 8 played where we have to go against Premier League opposition. The second time away from home where we have to go against Premier League opposition with 10 men. And this time it was for more than an hour. Declan Rice said it himself after the match. He said it was naivety. So to the gentleman that left me that comment on AFTV, he wasn't blaming the match officials at all. He said it was naivety, and he said that we were making our lives difficult. So, I might be whatever you wanted to call me, the unloyal, fickle football fan. But one of our best players is saying exactly the same thing. Let's start with Leandro Trossard. Wasn't having a good game to begin with. One of the reasons why I think a lot of people don't feel as comfortable with Trossard starting on the wing is because he doesn't have the natural attributes that a winger ought to have in terms of pacing behind and so forth, but he's not particularly great when he's receiving the ball back to goal and he's under pressure. When people crowd him out, it's actually, he struggles sometimes. This was a prime example. In that situation, he could have tried to turn and the ball could have gone out for a throw. He could have tried to turn and lost the ball. He could have tried to play the ball back to his defenders, but on the deck. So you don't have to worry about the flight of the ball. You don't have to worry about it bouncing. You don't have to worry about overhitting it to the extent that your centre-backs are left in no man's land. He chooses, in my opinion, what was the worst possible option. That in and of itself isn't good enough. Having said that, that sort of shit can happen in a match. What William Saliba then does, now let's talk about William Saliba. Again, I want to preface this by saying what I said at the beginning. I'm only saying this because I know how good we are. I'm only saying this because I know how close we are. What William Saliba does there is nothing short of immature and showing signs of inexperience. And this is why people place emphasis on experience, by the way. When people want to fast track William Saliba to the greatest centre-back in the world, a lot of people say, well, he hasn't been doing it for that long and he still has a lot to learn. It is because of scenarios like this. A more experienced defender, with his recovery pace, knowing that he's the last man, knowing that Evan Nilsson's not been in the best of goal-scoring form, knowing that we have David Raya that he still has to get past, and knowing that we have Liverpool next, and knowing that we live in the VAR era akin to CCTV, and knowing that referees have not been reluctant to give us red cards before, knowing all of that, he puts hands on him. Call me over the top, call me too scathing. William, I love you, brother. That was stupid. And that is the most likely reason as to why we didn't win that game. And that could be a reason as to why we really struggle against Liverpool at home. But I'll come to that separately. I don't have a problem with the decision. When I saw it first off, I thought it was going to be a red card. The referee gives a yellow. And I understand why the referee has given a yellow. What was probably going through the referee's mind was, he's so close to the halfway line. He has a long way to run back. There is a possibility that Ben White recovers. But that isn't what the offence is called. The offence is called preventing a clear goal-scoring opportunity. Let's reverse the roles. Just to hammer this point home, let's reverse the roles. Bukayo Saka and someone else from another team on the halfway line and he gets brought down there, are we saying that it's a clear goal scoring opportunity if one of our players is reasonably likely to be left one-on-one with a goalkeeper? The answer is yes. So I understand what the referee was trying to do with the yellow. I was very grateful to him for trying to give the yellow. But I think their VAR intervened because I hate the phrase, but to the letter of the law, William Saliba committed the offence that warrants a red card. Having said that, the only small potential gripe that people might have, not one that I have, by the way, not one that I have, I think the correct decision was reached. I watched the overlap the other day. Howard Webb was on there. One of the things that he was saying is, we're really trying to be less interventionist with those sorts of things, particularly where there is an element of subjectivity involved, and we are going with the referee's call. We're trying to defer to the referee's decision. Now, in that scenario, if that's the message that's been given, that isn't exactly what happened. The reason I'm not going to sit here and piss and moan about it is because, all in all, if the shoe was on the other foot, I would have said the correct decision was reached and we move on. Even then, with Ben White on the pitch, with our starting centre-backs on the pitch, with Calafiori on the pitch, and basically with three midfielders that are more than capable of playing the six on the pitch, I thought we still have enough to keep a clean sheet and maybe nick one. Maybe my nervy 1-0 prediction was right. Then comes the substitution. Everything that I was just saying about Raheem Sterling and him being the only real pace outlet and the only sort of, I wouldn't even say shining light, I'd say attacking flickering light, because there wasn't much else. The minute he goes off and Kivior comes on, that sends a message to me that we're going to try and shut up shop. That sends a message to the opponent that we're going to try and shut up shop. And it also tells the opponent, with Trossard, Partey, Rice, Marino, Havertz, with those players on the pitch, we can probably advance a fair bit more and not have to worry about too much on the break. I don't think they could have felt the same way with Raheem Sterling. And I was sat there and I was trying to unpack Arteta's logic there. I understand he couldn't bring Martinelli on because he wasn't fit enough to put in a shift that you'd have to put in when you're down to 10 men. And he was definitely carrying something. I understand that. And he only had, half an hour in him. Fine. The only thing I can think of is that we saw Raheem Sterling and Ben White get absolutely smoked by Semenyo with ease. Get absolutely smoked on that flank. And he just thought we have to be more defensively sound, because if we go behind now, given what I have available, we're probably not going to get to. The problem is we still made the defensive change, didn't carry enough threat. A lot of people that think attack is the best form of defense in that situation may well have been right. Now, when I look at if I go back to the Brighton game, we had a lead to protect. If I go back to the City game, we had a lead to protect. But over here, we didn't. And I'm one of Mikel Arteta's biggest fans, and I stand up for him all the time. But here, against Bournemouth, is there an argument that we perhaps should have taken more of a risk, gone to win it, and if we don't win it, then so be it, as opposed to simply trying not to lose and then losing? I think in terms of the optics, in terms of the narrative, in terms of the way that result stung, and in terms of how painful it was to watch, I think that was the biggest aggravating factors there. But as I say, look, the red card comes at 0-0. Okay, the red card comes at 0-0. And in the same way that in the Brighton game, I was looking at Saka and Havertz and saying, even though we were down to 10, we probably had the chance of the game to win it. I didn't dwell on it too much because I was like, you know what, we got a point, we got out of there, cool. Here, Marino had a chance, but he's not an attacking player, and there was a player in front of him and he dragged it, so be it. The one that made me feel physically sick, I'll be honest with you, was the Martinelli one. It was the Martinelli one. There's been a lot of talk about whether Gabriel Jesus is a good enough squad option to fill in for Kai Havertz. That's because people are perfectly happy with Kai Havertz starting up top. There's been a lot of talk about whether Raheem Sterling, for example, or anyone that we have is a good enough backup option to Bukayo Saka, but that's because people are perfectly happy with Bukayo Saka starting, understandably. One of the reasons that we rotate so much on the left-hand side, and one of the reasons why a lot of people were calling for an upgrade on the left-hand side, and one of the reasons why there were so many people saying, please bring in Nico Williams, was because there are concerns on that left-hand side, and that lack of ruthlessness there from Martinelli is exactly why. That's exactly why. There are moments in a game, there are moments on a weekend, and there are moments in a season that can alter the trajectory. A lot of people are going to say, look, it's only one game, it's only one chance, you're being an idiot. Fine. If that's the way you feel, that's the way you feel. Everyone has their own opinion. We can agree to disagree. But there are moments when you just know that that's going to come back and bite you in the ass. When we missed that chance, that was when I knew that today was not going to be our day. And I was not surprised at all that it was within a minute or two that they went and got the goal. Anyone that's played football, anyone that's been in a stadium, anyone that has been about for that long knows that when something like that happens, momentum absolutely shifts. It's akin to missing a penalty. The tide turns. That was not a difficult finish. That was a less difficult finish than the one that he put away against Southampton, in my opinion. The angle against Southampton was far more difficult. The flight of the ball was far more difficult to judge. The run that he had to make was far more difficult. This, and Arteta hones in on it post-match. He says, look, there were a number of errors. Martinelli has the chance to win the game. Now, I've seen a lot of stuff online about it's unfair of the manager to only label the Martinelli miss as the error. But I think what's happened here is everyone's tried and I think the manager's tried the sort of arm around the player approach with Martinelli. And it hasn't quite made him the killer that we need him to be, because there isn't anyone else on that flank who is going to be that killer. Maybe it's time to be a bit more forthright with him and see if that lights a fire up under his arse and he fixes up, because he can't be missing chances like that. That poor decision-making is going to cost us. And when I talk about moments leading to results, leading to weekends, I mean, that is a moment. Look, if we go 1-0 up, then we're in exactly the place that we want to be. We shut up shop, fantastic. It didn't happen. But then they went and scored immediately afterwards. And then our rivals win. It alters the trajectory of the season. I also saw some criticism for Mourinho. What Arteta did with Mourinho there is he gave him a Premier League start very, very early in his Arsenal, well, at the beginning of his Arsenal career, in a position that he is not accustomed to, and in a position where he already is inevitably going to have a lack of chemistry around him, because that's not our usual front three with Sterling there. There's an element of an imbalance there. And Trossard hasn't played on the left in a bit of time. So for anyone who's judging Mourinho based upon that performance, just settle down a bit. Because I've seen a lot of, I mean, again, I think if you go back to my AFTV fan cam and look at the comments, there are a lot of people saying, I never want to see Mourinho in an Arsenal shirt again. I mean, that's not his position. And he actually, for me, in the first half anyway, did a lot of good. Protected the ball quite well. Won quite a few duels, but he didn't have a cutting-edge pass and he didn't really show much attacking prowess at all. That's quite unsurprising for someone that's not well-versed in playing in that position. The worry here is we do have someone that we think can play in that position and doesn't. I don't have as much of a problem with you putting Trossard on the left if Martinelli's not fit. If you then go for the closest like-for-like replacement that we have available, and that's Ethan. And every cameo that Ethan's made, he's shown excitement, he's shown bravery. The one thing that Odegaard does that I think is irreplaceable in our team is the way that he can very often drop deep, but also progress the ball and give you that wonderful, wonderful link between defense and attack. Ethan is one of our most, from what I can see anyway, I'm not suggesting that, I can write a textbook on the guy, but he is one of our most natural and talented progressive ball carriers. Was this the game to start him? Hindsight is a wonderful thing. And I say all of this because at the outset, I said that the starting 11 for me was still good enough to win this game. But I understand the concerns. Because what the message that is being sent in that situation is you're willing to start someone who looks unnatural in that position And that means that you probably don't think that Ethan's as ready as we had all hoped. That then provides a fair bit of credence to the people that were raising concerns about the transfer window. It does. But the reason I can't draw that conclusion just yet is because there's a lot of football to be played. And Ethan may well get minutes going forward. And he may well show us exactly what he's made of. Or a few of our players come back, we string some results together, and this is a distant memory. Who knows? Only time will tell. But that doesn't change the fact that this one hurts, man. And one of the things I was thinking about overnight was, why does this one hurt so much? Because look, everyone has a bad day at the office, right? And even though our rivals won, I mean, I know that we're now a 2 result swing against Liverpool, but the wonderful thing is they come to ours and we have an opportunity to make that, what is it, a point? And 3 points against Manchester City, although it has the opportunity to be devastating, we know that. It's not irreparable just yet. And if we say that we believed the players at the end of last year when they said that they weren't satisfied with second, if we say that we believed all of the players when they went up to the manager at that end of season dinner and said, no, we're going to win the league, then we ought to still believe that they can progress and that the season isn't over, right? And that's the way that I look at it. But last year, our record against the big six was actually akin to what it's looked like this year, or the top six even, right? Whatever you want to call it. But look, we've come up against City, we've come up against Villa, we've come up against Tottenham. We've played them all away from home. We got some good results. And our Big Six record, I think, was the best last year too. It was the game like this, where we shot ourselves in the foot. Recurring themes. The fact that we feel like we've been here before. The fact that we did place so much credence and belief upon the messaging that was coming out of the dressing room at the end of last season. The fact that we probably still remember the pain of losing out the way that we did at the end of last season. The fact that a lot of us remember how we felt over the summer when we were looking back at the West Ham game, when we were looking back at the Fulham games, and we were looking back at the Villa games, and we were looking back at the Newcastle game, and we were looking back at dropping points to Chelsea. Those games. We don't want that to happen again. The problem is this shows a sign that we haven't left that behind, and that's one of the reasons why this hurts so much. The other reason why this hurts so much is this issue with ruthlessness in attack. Now, I know I'm going to be met with, yeah, but mate, we didn't have Ødegaard. Martinelli wasn't fit. We didn't have Saka. These are 3 players that ultimately are 3 of our starting 4. I understand that. I do understand that, but injuries are a part of football, man. And I would understand that argument if we were coming up against, no disrespect to Bournemouth, by the way, they fully deserved their win, and their manager showed bravery because when he smelled blood, he brought on 3 attacking substitutions, and they made a difference. Credit to them. But there is a ruthlessness in attack, and now, having seen the amount of times that certain players are becoming repeat offenders in these crunch moments, as I say, I've seen them score more difficult goals. The worry is now, it's not a question of ability. Maybe it's a question of mindset. Maybe it's a question of a ruthless mindset. Maybe it's a question of the pressure is getting to someone like Martinelli in that situation. Maybe he does know what's riding on it. That is a concern, and that is something that's been a concern since, I think it may have been 2 years ago, when we were ahead at Liverpool. It went back to 2-2, but we still had the opportunity to win it. Martinelli has a relatively simple crossfield ball, but he has the right idea, but he doesn't execute it. These are moments that we look back on. The fact that I still remember it 2 years later, it means it's a moment that we look back on and think that could have changed the course of a season. That's where the worry is, because when I know that I began this by saying we need to look inward and not outward, but when you're looking at Núñez, Jota, Diaz, Salah, you think, yeah, like goals, particularly Jota and Salah, gunmen, ruthlessness in attack. It doesn't take a lot for them to punish you. And you could say the same about, I mean, I'm not just talking about Erling Haaland here, but you could say the same about KDB. You could say the same about Phil Foden. You could say the same about a number of those players too, right? I'm not suggesting that we don't have those players, but when it comes to when we don't have our first choice available, are we as clinical and are we as ruthless as we need to be to get over the line this season? This has raised further questions at a time where we didn't need them. But I think the primary reason as to why this hurts so much is we know what's to come. We know what's to come, and the injuries don't seem to be getting any better. With Saliba out, I would assume that it's not going to be Kivior after that performance. Look, I don't think the penalty changed the game, even though it was a poor bit of play from him. I don't think it changed the game, but his general performance showed that when you have a player with positional nous and pace, they can find them out. Liverpool have that. So I assume you're going to have Ben White there. But who do we play at right back? People are saying Timber, but he wasn't in the matchday squad. And can we play Tomiyasu? When was the last time he played? Do you really want that to be his first game back? That's one of the reasons for concern. Our next three fixtures: Liverpool, Newcastle, Chelsea. Now, Liverpool don't have an easy run either, right? They have Arsenal, Brighton, and Villa, but they got past Chelsea today. They have a tough run, but they started their tough run well. Manchester City, Southampton, Bournemouth, and Brighton, all teams that we've played. Now, Southampton we went 1-0 down to. Bournemouth beat us, and Brighton took a point off us. But in your heart of hearts, guys, in your heart of hearts, what do you see Manchester City getting from those next three games? That's why this one hurts. And that's why this early in the season, that was a must-win game. Anyway, all of the negative energy has now been dispelled. Partey and Rice look pretty good. I'm going to move on to some positives. I have to. I love the club. I'm not the unloyal or disloyal fan that guy in the comments wanted. I love the club. That's why this hurts so much, right? When you love hard, the pain hits 10 times as hard, right? Partey, I thought, gave absolutely everything. And in the first half, he looked like a really, really good ball progressor. I thought he did great work dropping into the back four. Any question as to his fitness, I think, not in terms of how injury prone he is, because that's always going to be a concern, but in terms of the gas that he has in him and his legs, I think he dispelled those. And Rice did what I think more players should have done yesterday, because there were spaces to be run into, and he found them. He just legged it, ran straight through their midfield, got into great attacking positions, but he looked around and there was nothing on for him because we didn't have the attacking prowess or the attacking intent in that situation, sadly. But I thought he was very good. The other positive, and I'm clutching at straws here, and I know I am. But under Mikel Arteta, when Arsenal have their backs against the wall and you have a run of games that then turn into make or break games, akin to last Christmas, in fact, when a lot of people were saying, listen, if we don't fix up quickly, we're going to find ourselves in a top four race. We can put together some incredible results against some tough teams. And what I was saying earlier about us having a better record against the better teams, well, Liverpool, Newcastle, and Chelsea all come into that bracket for me. Liverpool's going to be tough. Because they have momentum. They absolutely have momentum. I might be wrong here, but I think of their last 10 or 11 games in all competitions, I think it's 10 games that they've played in all competitions that they've won 9, or they've won 10 out of 11. They've got momentum. They don't have any real injury concerns, aside from the fact that Jota went off today, but I think that was more of a knock, and he'll be back. They're serious. So we need to remedy that momentum. And that's why I would have loved it to be an FA Cup or Carabao Cup game, because Saliba could have served his ban there the same way that Trossard served his ban in the Carabao Cup. But it's not. It's a Champions League game, but it's a home game. We're at home against Liverpool. We're at home against Shakhtar. Call it a mock, call it a dress rehearsal, call it whatever you want to call it. I know there's a lot of people saying you need to give players a rest, having just come back from the international break. No, if there's one thing that this game on the weekend showed, is that if we're going to have to change the system, we need to work on it, because when we don't have time to work on it, we look all at sea. We look relatively clueless, and we are going to have to change the back four because Saliba's out. I don't know if Timber's going to be fit. I don't know if Odegaard's going to be fit. I don't know if Saka's going to be fit. But the Arsenal medical staff and the Arsenal team selection committee, the manager, they know who's more likely than not to be fit on Saturday, and I think they need to use this Shakhtar game to address the momentum, but more importantly, play the game that you want to play against Liverpool and come back with a bang. I said it on my fan cam on AFTV. Shakhtar need to hold smoke this week. We need to dispel this result as quickly as possible, because if the Shakhtar result doesn't go our way, then the momentum going into the Liverpool game is absolute nerves. Absolute nerves. I think it was Liverpool last year, actually. at the Emirates. They were I think they were top of the league. They were ahead of our stage. I think they'd only lost one game against maybe Tottenham, and even that was a bit of a robbery. We looked good and we beat them, and that led to a bit of a rut for them. Same again, please, lads. Same again, please, lads. This is, I know this sounds silly. I know it's very early, but with those next 3 games and having dropped points in 3 of our first 8, when we're talking about the Premier League title, guys, I'm only saying this because of how much respect I give to Manchester City and what they've achieved, and also a lot of these Liverpool players and what they've achieved. This next 3 games, it's defining. Call it premature, call it what you want, but it's season defining. And the only bit of encouragement I have is that I think maybe he could have put Saka in the squad, and Arteta said himself that he didn't want to force it, so I think he'll be around. He alluded to the fact that he's confident that Odegaard will be back before the next international break. He might be okay for Liverpool. There were early whispers that when the injury occurred, the target was to get him back for the Liverpool game. I'd love to see him on the bench against Shakhtar. I would love to see him on the bench against Shakhtar. And let's take it from there. But that's all to say, no, I haven't lost all hope. No, I haven't lost all belief. And in the course of the season, it will change. But at the end of last season, I genuinely felt we were going to win the league. Throughout the course of the transfer window, I did, but contingent upon a particular ilk of signing coming through. When the transfer window closed, my belief really did take a knock. And if you had a gun to my head at that point, I would have said it looks more likely than not that it's going to be City. But then we come through that horrible run of games. We get the draw against City, and my belief is sky high. And I'm thinking, this team just does not want to lose. They don't know how to lose. Then I see a result like Bournemouth. Look, it's not good for my heart, man. I know this isn't normal. But what we're up against isn't normal, and what we're trying to do isn't normal. Wrong answers only. To my supporters, wrong answers only. Last week's question for wrong answers only was, what will happen to Manchester City Football Club after the 115 charges are decided upon? Before I give you the answer, I have to really, really thank you all for the engagement and the feedback for the last video. I saw a lot of people saying, listen, this is your lane. Please stick to it. I promise you that whenever anything of that sort comes out in the public domain, I will do exactly the same thing, because I was worried that people weren't going to enjoy it, because I really enjoyed delivering it. So I'm so glad that you enjoyed watching it. The question was, what will happen to Manchester City Football Club after the 115 charges are decided upon? We have a runner-up and a winner. The runner-up for me, they'll buy all Premier League clubs that went against them and deliberately find a way of sending them into administration. That was Donny G 6636. But the winner for me, I thought that was quite funny. What will happen to Manchester City when the 115 charges are decided upon? Nothing. But Everton will get deducted 40 points. That, sadly, seems like it's going to be the most realistic outcome, but we'll see where it is. This week, usually I poke fun at other teams because they've lost, but this week it was us. But I don't poke fun at my players. That's not my style. This is an Arsenal channel. Get out of here if you think I'm going to do that. So this week I'm going to try and poke fun at the man that was in the stands on his phone when our player got sent off. And I'm hoping that you guys can make me smile and make me laugh in the comments, because you are one of the most creative communities I've ever seen. This week's question, what is Howard Webb's guilty pleasure outside of football? That's what is Howard Webb's guilty pleasure outside of football. We are on the road to 5,000 subscribers. I did not think I'd have any shot of getting anywhere near that this side of Christmas, but we've now hit the 4,500 mark. Thank you so much. The YouTube statistics at the back end tell me that 52% of the people that watch my videos are not subscribers. Guys, if you could, it would mean the world, because the more engagement that I have, the more content I can put out on this channel, because it just makes it more feasible for me. And I'm saying all of this with a view to hopefully being able to really, really make something of this in the future. So thank you to everyone who's left a comment. Thank you to everyone who's viewed. Thank you to all the generous people that have left us super thanks. There's a guy called Suj who shows so much support across all the Arsenal fan channels. Thank you so much for the super thanks last week. I hope this was cathartic. I hope it wasn't too much of a downer in terms of an episode. Arsenal fans, I'm going into work this week. I know what it feels like when you have to go and see that Tottenham fan in the office, that Manchester United fan in the office, that Liverpool fan in the office. I know. I know what it's like in your WhatsApp groups. Just remember, we are all in this together. The season isn't over. And hopefully the next episode of the One Mic podcast is coming back after a win against Liverpool and all of the momentum and the feeling around the fan base has changed. You've been listening to Sheroy's voice. This is the One Mic podcast. Until next time, people.